Hello, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today with a recap from our stamping and stenciling live stream that was part of the Sock Blank Special 2. Using various colors of food coloring, we set out to explore different ways we could create shapes on these pre-knit blanks using a variety of stencils, cookie cutters, rubber stamps, and even sponges that I cut out into shapes. We also wanted to explore the use of a thickening agent. In this case, we used guar gum to add to our food coloring based dies to allow us to see if making these dies thicker will allow us to get sharper shapes when we do our stenciling. In all of the cases where I used the guar gum, I had mixed 1/4 teaspoon of the guar gum powder into 8 ounces of water, and I mixed it with my Magic Bullet blender to make sure that the guar gum was well distributed amongst the liquid. Some people will use as much as a 1/2 teaspoon of the guar gum in 8 ounces of water, but I wanted to start at a lower concentration so we would know how much we might want to adjust or increase this in the future. The patterns we were able to create are absolutely beautiful. It's almost a shame that we want to unravel these to turn into other types of knitting projects. But I think that stenciling can be a really fun way to leave an adorable mark on a blank if you want to give someone the blank intact so they can unravel it on their own. In this live stream, I dyed 4 different blanks that were a combination of commercially purchased blanks and homemade blanks. 2 of the blanks are Knit Picks Stroll blanks. These are double-stranded blanks knit with 2 strands of Stroll fingering weight yarn, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. The 2 homemade blanks on the top and bottom right are single-stranded blanks made with Knit Picks Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn. I made both on hand crank knitting machines. This blank I knit in the round on a Singer knitting machine, and this other blank on the top I knit flat on a loops and threads knitting machine. Creating your own blanks is a nice way to vary the yarn weight and fiber content from what you can purchase commercially in blanks intended for dyeing. I started with one of the Knit Picks Stroll blanks because I know that colors bind faster to this superwash blend than they do to the Wool of the Andes blend. I figured that if the guar gum thickener wasn't enough for the colors to sort of stay put, then we would know to increase the concentration before moving on to the Wool of the Andes yarns. In this blank, I wanted to play around with a lot of the different techniques to see what worked well and what didn't work well. And now I will give you some close-ups and talk about things a bit more. I started off with my bird stencil, and I had 2 different colors that were mixed that both had the same concentration of Wilton's Violet food coloring. But one of them had guar gum and one did not. And the same is true with the stripes on either side. This stripe I used with food coloring that had some of the guar gum mixture, and this one did not. And you can see that the lines that you get when you use the guar gum are a lot sharper. And you see less spreading and breaking of the colors. You do see a tiny bit of a blue halo around this bird that we used for the guar gum, but overall, you can tell that that is a bird versus just sort of a bit more of a blob. Both are beautiful, but if you want to get the more defined shape, it is worth trying this with the guar gum. Here's another example where I was painting on a stencil with both the guar gum mixture and a mixture without the guar gum. And again, you can see how sharp some of these lines are versus the softer spread. But I think that it's really cool that we saw some of the blue breaking and could still make out some of the lines from the base pairing of this DNA double helix. We tried some craft rubber stamps with the guar gum mixture, but unfortunately the the food coloring didn't really stay on the rubber stamp very well, so we weren't able to get a really well-defined shape. I used some cookie cutters as a stencil and then used my foam brush to apply the food coloring that was mixed with guar gum and then without. I cut a sponge into a heart shape to use as a stamp. And again, you can see the drastic difference between with guar gum and without. In these top two spaces, we still see some of the distinct either pumpkin or heart shape because the red number 3 in Wilton's Violet does bind to the yarn a lot faster than the blues, which is why we end up with this halo. So I think that you can try to take advantage of this type of spreading with stamping and stenciling. However, at some points you risk losing a lot of definition of your shape. So if you really want to create a distinct, recognizable shape, it's probably worth using the thickener. I painted the rubbered back of this TIE Fighter stencil with just some straight Wilton's Violet food coloring. The food coloring didn't stick to the cookie cutter very well, but I was able to stamp and get this really, really cool shape on our blank and even stamp it a second time. And so it was fun to play with. And when you're transferring little liquid, you can still get some pretty nicely defined shapes. I decided to take this painting a step further, and I painted this heart and the letter R onto the blank using a paintbrush and straight Wilton's Violet food coloring. Because so little dye was transferred onto the blank, it did not spread out when we steamed this to set the heat. But we still get some breaking around here, but the red struck fast enough that we have amazing definition. I think that if I were going to try writing song lyrics on a blank or something in the future, I would be inclined to use a paintbrush and the straight icing colors instead of going for the food coloring markers like I tried in a different episode of the Sock Blank Special 2. The wrong side of this practice blank is really cool. On the colors where I did not use any guar gum, the breaking is really, really obvious. You see that we have a lot more blue than reds on the back of those shapes. But in the areas where I used the guar gum, you see purple coming all the way through, and you don't get this blue halo even on the wrong side. So not only does the guar gum help you get these distinct lines, but it helps you sort of prevent a lot of the color breaking. Therefore, even if you are not going to be doing a stamping or stenciling technique and you just want to hand paint some yarn, if you want to try to prevent your Wilton's Violet or maybe Wilton's Black from breaking, try mixing it with some guar gum so to give you some more control over how the color sort of behaves once you add it to your yarn. This may have been just a practice blank. However, I think that it'll look really, really cool when we unravel it. So I cannot wait to see what it'll look like. Next, I wanted to play around with the guar gum stenciling on the Wool of the Andes blank. Colors don't bind to non-superwash yarns like this as fast as they would, say, on the stroll yarn. So I wanted to see if with this concentration of guar gum, we still have the level of control needed to do some wonderful stamping and stenciling. You can definitely tell that we have DNA double helix shapes on this yarn. Therefore, it does work really, really nicely for stenciling. However, you would notice that you can see a lot more color breaking here than we did on the stroll blank. And these are all cases where we did use the guar gum. Now, I think that the breaking that we see on this DNA, for example, is breathtaking. The red struck, the blue spread, and it is nothing like what we would have seen if we had tried using some non-guar gum colors, where I think it would have been a lot harder for us to see any of the base pair definition from the stencils. So I do think it could be worth using a higher concentration of guar gum if you're using a a yarn where the colors don't bind quite as fast. But this is something that you should play around with and see how it really turns out. For comparison's sake, I did a stripe of food coloring with guar gum and a stripe of food coloring without guar gum. Can you tell which one is which? When I used the guar gum, the stripe is a lot better defined than when I did not use it. And this is even very apparent on the back. You see a lot of spread from without the guar gum. I did try doing some stenciling using some cookie cutters again, but I only had a little bit of the Wilton's Violet with no guar gum left, so you don't really see as much of, it sort of did stay in place, but there wasn't very much food coloring, so the red struck very quickly. I did have one heart that I tried to do that had once again, no guar gum in this teal dye, and well, it spread. You can barely tell that there was a shape, especially when you compare it to, say, the heart that we had mixed with guar gum over here. Now this blank was one that was knit in the round, so therefore when we were doing all of our stenciling, we were going through 2 layers of fabric. So on the wrong side we do have some color penetration, but it is pretty mottled and doesn't really show too much. I think that even though this was again a practice blank, when we unravel it, we will have some really cool patterns. This Wilton's Black section is the one that excited me the most while I was dyeing this blank. So I thought that this color would be sort of the winner for when I wanted to start stenciling to over dye another blank. If these 2 blanks look familiar, it's because they should. I dyed the backgrounds of these 2 blanks in the first Sock Blank Special 2 live stream. I wanted to have some random patterns that were more pastel colors to use as the backdrop, so that way when I did some stenciling or stamping on them and we go to unravel them, all of the negative space would not just be white. I started off with the single-stranded flat Wool of the Andes blank that I knit on the Loops and Threads knitting machine. I wanted to do the really large DNA stencil, larger than the ones that I used on the practice form, to see how good of the definition I could see after we dyed the blank and then steamed it. I pre-soaked all of the blanks in some tap water with at least 2 tablespoons of vinegar, so that way it was already acidic when I started stamping to add the dyes. Therefore, after I had done my stenciling and then steamed it, we could add the colors in place so they would be permanent. In the DNA stencil on this blank, you can definitely make out the pattern, but there's also absolutely color spreading out around this pattern. I think I got a little better as I went on, and so in this last one I might have used a little less food coloring as I was painting the dye with the foam brush onto the stencil. But the spreading from this first one is actually really pretty and sort of goes along with the overall splotched backdrop really nicely. This is another example of where I think that it could be worth increasing the amount of guar gum that you're using if you want to hand paint onto 100% wool yarn that is non-superwash, or maybe even an alpaca blend or something that absorbs food coloring color slower than superwash yarns. Again, the guar gum concentration that I used in this live stream was 1/4 teaspoon of guar gum mixed in 8 ounces of water. So next time I might double the amount of guar gum and see if that helps improve the sharpness of the lines that we could see on a Wool of the Andes worsted weight blank. We got really good color penetration through the entire blank. And you can even on the one with the least amount of dye see almost the DNA double helix shape. If you add too much food coloring, it's a little harder to tell what it is. But I just wanted to point out that this technique does lead to color penetration through the entire blank, versus a lightly applied layer of color on one side. Finally, we went back to our bird stencil to dye, some happy birds and some of the flowers onto this Knit Pick Stroll blank. I decided to do the stenciling with two different colors, teal and black, mainly because I wanted colors that went really nicely with the background, which was dyed in as a mixture of broken black to begin with. But I also wanted to see how black the black food coloring would look on the blank. It is a little hard to tell with the camera, but we did not achieve a true black with the colors that I mixed from this live stream. Although we do have a really, really dark color with minimal breaking. So this is the same black that we used in the DNA stencil before. So you can really see the difference from when you use black on a superwash nylon blend versus black on 100% wool. The shapes are really recognizable, and even you can see some of the really little details if you look closely. This time I did not get really heavy color penetration to the wrong side of the fabric. Through all the stenciling, I'd learned that a lighter application of the dye gives you better definition in the shapes. So that sort of translates to what we see on the backhand side. You can still see the shapes, but when I used a lighter touch, you don't have very much coming through to the wrong side. Overall, I discovered that I am a much bigger fan of stenciling than I am stamping when it comes to using this technique on blanks. I think that guar gum is a fantastic tool, and I look forward to exploring its use in the future, especially since I have a 10-ounce bag of the guar gum, and I only used a 1/4 teaspoon for the dyeing of all of these blanks. Thank you so much, Erin from I Can Craft That, for making me the DNA stencils. This made this project even more fun, and I know that I want to play around with these stencils more in the future. In addition to using thickeners like guar gum, I thought that it would be fun to try some of the spraying techniques with the stencils to see if there's another way that you can add shapes to your hand-dyed blanks. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you've enjoyed these live streams, please subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. It's not usual for me to do so many live streams in a week, but I do release new videos every week exploring different types of dyeing techniques, and you really don't want to miss them. Thanks for watching!